Here's a message from Abby. I moved to Ecuador in the 80s with no knowledge of that country's policies. While there I learned that suing a city or a doctor for negligence, i.e. manhole covers missing causing accidents or surgery mistakes, was not permitted. I also learned that many people there wanted to move to the States because they imagined the high quality of their lives would improve by living here in the land of opportunity. I got the sense from comparing the two government policies that a person's life is more valued here than in Ecuador. What is your opinion about that in Ecuador and other countries, and how can we, potential expats, research the many disadvantages as well as the advantages to living outside the U.S.? Well, start by making the comment that things have changed since the 80s, more so in places like Ecuador and other emerging markets than I think even than in the U.S. Um, Life is a little bit better, I think, for most people in compared to the 80s in Ecuador. There's more prosperity, there's better infrastructure, better services, better technology, and more job opportunities than there used to be. That doesn't mean that it's a piece of cake to get by in Ecuador. It certainly isn't, but I think conditions have improved. Um, in terms of the what you can and can't sue for, and the justice system, and the disadvantages of moving overseas are not as easy to find in your research as the advantages. The advantages are all over the internet, and it's easy to come up with that. Everyone seems to have the same 10-point bullet list of advantages of living and investing in whatever country they're promoting. And I can relate to this issue. We do our best to Retire Worldwide to point out disadvantages and advantages, and there are a number of disadvantages. Certainly, the lack of a functioning justice system, for the most part, throughout the rest of the world, we take that for granted. Although you could argue that in the U.S. there's no real justice system either. Whoever has the most money wins, and there's some truth to that. Um, but I would still argue that the justice system functions better and more fairly in Western societies than it does in any of some of these other countries in Latin America or Asia, for example. So the justice system, or lack of one, it can actually be a benefit in a lot of ways, because people tend to look after themselves. And I think some of the frivolous lawsuits that we see in the U.S. is part of the problem with their society, is that when you can sue someone because you slipped and fell, or you spilled coffee on your shirt, that drives up the costs for everyone. And I think the fact that you can sue for just about anything, has created high costs in medical care, and obviously legal services are expensive. So I'm not convinced that style of justice is very effective either, at least in places like Ecuador. It's up to you to watch your step, and if you have a problem with someone else, you try to settle it amongst yourselves. Most of the fender benders that happen in the developing world, the people get out and they look at the damage, and they settle on an agreement, and they don't even bother with the insurance companies because it's such a hassle to actually try to recover any of your money that way. So there are other disadvantages. I think a big one is the cultural change and missing your friends and family back home. I think that's a disadvantage that's easy to overlook and may not settle in until you're gone for several months or more. Other disadvantages, certainly anything dealing with the government is very inefficient and slow in most developing countries. So getting a driver's license, paying a traffic ticket, obtaining your residency visa, applying for a business license, all of those events that we rely on for our governments usually don't function very well overseas. So there's another disadvantage. Um, so I think for the most part, you have to experience it to see if the disadvantages outweigh the advantages. I think most people, um, it's we're in it for the experience, and whether it be positive or negative, you live for the experience and you make the best of of the situation. But certainly, our hosts, which are people living overseas, they are part of our network. And for research members who, if you look at the research membership plan, you gain access to their contact information. I think those are good sources of information for both the good and the bad of living overseas, and you can make direct contact with them.